I woke up that morning to the sound of shattering glass, except it wasn't my windows, it was something worse. I bolted outside still in slippers and saw Karen, my self-appointed neighborhood tyrant, standing on my lawn wielding a hammer like she was auditioning for a bad reality show. My satellite dish lay in pieces at her feet, wires dangling like snapped veins. She looked up at me with that smug face that only people who thrive on petty control can manage. "Finally," she said, brushing her hands off, "that ugly eyesore is gone." "You're welcome." Now, here's the kicker. My ugly eyesore wasn't a Dish Network subscription to late-night cable. It wasn't even mine in the conventional sense. It was a government-issued emergency receiver, part of a federal contract I'd signed because of my background in communications work. It was linked to an emergency grid that stayed quiet unless something catastrophic was happening, which meant that Karen had just smashed a line into the Department of Homeland Security's communication network because she didn't like how it clashed with her manicured azaleas. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. Instead, I just stood there, letting the silence work on her nerve. She mistook it for weakness. "You'll thank me later," she said, stepping over the wreckage as if she hadn't just committed felony destruction of government property. "The HOA has been discussing this for months. You ignored the letters, so I took care of it myself." That's when I felt the corner of my mouth curl into something that probably unnerved her more than any screaming could. Because what she didn't know, and what I already suspected, was that the moment she swung that hammer, two very important things happened. First, an alert had gone out on the emergency line. Second, cameras, mine, not the HOA's, captured every second of her crime in glorious 4K. She must have noticed my expression because she suddenly fumbled for justification. "Don't look at me like that. The HOA has rules against unsightly equipment on the property line. You should have complied." "Karen," I finally said, calm as a man at a poker table with a winning hand, "that wasn't just a dish. That was a federal receiver. Do you know what that means?" Her confidence faltered for half a second, but entitlement is a stubborn armor. "Oh please, don't try to scare me with your little stories. I'll explain it to the board, and you'll be fine for refusing to remove it." It was almost beautiful to watch her dig her own grave with every word. Because she truly believed this was just another power play, another moment where she could puff up her feathers and intimidate me into compliance. But the reality was about to crash down harder than her hammer. I didn't move to stop her as she strutted back toward her house, muttering about how she'd send me the bill for cleaning up the yard. I just turned to the wreckage, snapped a photo for good measure, and walked inside. My phone was already buzzing with a restricted number. When I answered, the voice on the other end was as clipped as I expected. "This is the Emergency Communications Office. We've detected a disruption at your station. Confirm status." I looked out the window, where Karen was still huffing like she'd won a neighborhood war. "Status," I said. "Is that a civilian with a hammer decided she had more authority than the federal government?" There was a pause. Then, "We'll be sending someone. Stay on site." And that, right there, was the moment I knew Karen's little crusade against my ugly dish was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. Because she thought this was about HOA politics. What she didn't realize was that she had just declared war on federal infrastructure, and I was holding every piece of evidence needed to make sure she paid the price. And for once, I wasn't even going to have to lift a finger. By the time the black SUV rolled up, Karen had already marched back across the street twice. Once to yell at me for ignoring HOA bylaws, and once to take pictures of the wreckage like she was documenting some heroic community service. She was practically glowing with self-righteousness, her phone angled just so, narrating loudly enough for the whole cul-de-sac to hear. "The satellite dish was unsightly, dangerous, and completely against code," she said, making sure her voice carried. "As president of the HOA, I had no choice but to remove it myself." She wasn't talking to anyone in particular, but she desperately wanted an audience. What she didn't notice was the government plate on the SUV that stopped at the curb. Two men stepped out, both in dark suits, their expressions neutral but sharp, like the type of people who could ruin your day without raising their voices. They walked right past Karen, who tried to intercept them with a chirpy, "Oh, hi. Are you here to enforce HOA compliance?" The taller one simply glanced at her, then kept moving toward me. "Mr. Hale?" he asked, and I nodded. "Status is unchanged," I said, keeping my tone clipped but calm. "Civilian destroyed the receiver at 0800 hours. Karen's head whipped toward me, her smile evaporating. "Wait. Civilian? Excuse me, I am the HOA president." The shorter agent pulled out a small tablet, scrolling through something. "You're confirming she was the one responsible for the damage?" "Got it on 3 different cameras," I said. "Would you like the footage now or after you inspect the site?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "Footage? No, this is being blown way out of proportion. It was just a dish. Those things are not allowed per community guidelines." The tall agent turned to her. "Ma'am, what you destroyed is not a consumer satellite dish. It was a federally commissioned emergency communications receiver, linked to DHS grid channels. What you did constitutes destruction of federal property under Title 18, Section 1361 of the U.S. Code." Karen blinked. For the first time that morning, her certainty wavered. I don't understand. It was ugly. It ruined the look of the neighborhood. Nobody told me it was anything important." "Ma'am," the shorter agent said, calm but firm, "it has a federally mandated serial plate on the back. Warning stickers, too. You ignored them." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Those things? Oh, please, you can buy stickers like that on Amazon. You can't just go sticking a label on something and pretend it's government property." I almost laughed at that. The agents did not. One of them crouched over the shattered pieces, scanning barcodes on the equipment. The device beeped confirmation. "Registered. Active. Now inoperable." Karen's face drained of color. Wait, this is ridiculous. You can't expect me to know something like that." The tall one stood up, pulling out a small notebook. "Name." Karen's indignation snapped back like a rubber band. "Excuse me? I don't have to give you anything. This is private property, and you can't just barge into our neighborhood demanding names. I'll call my lawyer." That was the moment I knew we were heading into legendary territory. Because Karen was about to learn that lawyers don't mean much when you're up against federal jurisdiction. The agent didn't flinch. "Ma'am, we are not asking. We are informing you that you will need to provide identification for the official incident report." Karen sputtered, looking around as if expecting the neighbors to come running to her rescue. But instead, blinds were twitching, curtains were shifting, and 1 or 2 folks were already out on their lawns pretending to water plants while clearly eavesdropping. Her audience wasn't clapping this time. She crossed her arms, trying to regain her footing. "This whole thing is absurd. He's just a cranky homeowner who thinks the rules don't apply to him. I was protecting the community." I kept my voice low and even. "Karen, you didn't just break HOA rules today. You broke federal law. And I don't think even the board's cookie-baking committee is going to get you out of this one." The taller agent looked at me, almost like he was suppressing a smirk, then turned back to her. "We'll need you to step inside with us and answer some questions. The receiver you destroyed was connected to Emergency Alert Network. Any disruption could compromise disaster response in this region. Do you understand the severity?" She opened her mouth, but all that came out was a weak, "This can't be happening." It was happening. The agents led her toward her house. She tried one last grasp at control, tossing her head and saying loudly, "Well, maybe if someone had complied with the HOA and removed the dish when asked, I wouldn't have been forced to act." I called after her, "Don't worry, Karen. I'll send you the footage for your lawyer. In 4K. Multiple angles." The agents didn't laugh, but one of them coughed into his hand suspiciously. After they disappeared inside with her, I turned back to my porch. My phone buzzed again, another restricted call. "Mr. Hale," said the voice on the line. "We'll be dispatching replacement equipment, but until then, your site is offline. We'll also need you to provide testimony for the federal damage report. Do not discuss this with unauthorized parties." I looked at the neighbors, who were definitely authorized by nobody, whispering across lawns like middle schoolers at recess. "Got it," I said. The call ended. I sat down in my porch chair and waited. Because with Karen, the first mistake was always the loudest, but the fallout was always the longest. And I knew, deep down, that smashing that dish was only the beginning of what was about to unravel. Would you like me to continue Chapter 2 with the full 1,200 words expansion, building in the escalating conflicts inside Karen's interrogation, the HOA board's reaction, and the neighbors slowly turning on her, or keep it tighter like this summary style? By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Karen's interrogation with the agents had lasted nearly 2 hours, and by the time she emerged, her perfect suburban armor had cracked. She walked out of her house with her hair frizzing, cheeks flushed, and her voice sharp with the kind of brittle confidence only someone cornered could muster. She snapped at the agents, accused them of harassment, and stormed across her lawn like a queen exiled from her own castle. Of course, everyone noticed. The street had turned into a live stage play. Neighbors were lingering by their mailboxes, walking dogs 3 times in a row, and even setting up lawn chairs just to catch the action. Karen had built her entire reputation on ruling these people with HOA letters and clipped warnings about paint colors and grass length. Now she was the one under scrutiny, and the audience loved every second. I leaned against my porch railing, arms crossed, pretending to sip coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. She saw me and froze. For the briefest second, her face betrayed something like fear. Then she plastered on that familiar tight smile and marched over. "You need to call them off," she hissed, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Call who off?" I asked, feigning innocence. "The feds. The whatever those men are. They're harassing me. This is clearly some misunderstanding." She gestured broadly, as if waving away the gravity of federal law. "We can fix this without dragging the neighborhood into it." I tilted my head. "Karen, you dragged the neighborhood into it the moment you smashed a federally commissioned dish in broad daylight." Her eyes darted to the cluster of neighbors now obviously eavesdropping. "Lower your voice," she snapped. "The HOA will not stand behind you if you keep acting like this." "That's good," I said smoothly. "Because I won't need the HOA to stand behind me. But you might." Her nostrils flared. "Don't get cocky. I still have power here." I gave her a long, level look. "Not as much as you think. You didn't just chip a rule. You tore a hole in a system that doesn't care about your bylaws or your title. And unlike grass-length violations, this one carries prison time." Her composure wavered. She opened her mouth, closed it, then stomped off, muttering about incompetent men in suits and overblown government drama. But here's where things really shifted. The board called an emergency meeting that afternoon. Usually those gatherings were dull affairs, Karen lecturing while people half listened. This time, though, every chair was filled. People brought snacks, leaned against walls, even recorded on their phones. It wasn't just a meeting. It was the reckoning. Karen tried to seize control right away. She stood at the head of the table in the clubhouse, slamming her folder down. "The situation with the satellite dish has been blown out of proportion," she declared. "I acted in the best interest of the community, and I expect full support from this board." But the board members weren't nodding the way they usually did. Greg, who normally never spoke except to ask about landscaping contracts, cleared his throat. "Karen, did you really destroy government property?" Her jaw tightened. "It wasn't government property. It was an unsightly, non-compliant piece of equipment installed without board approval." A voice from the back. "My nephew works for County Emergency Services. He says those dishes are serious. They're tied to disaster alerts." Karen flushed. That's just hearsay. You can't believe every rumor you hear. I sat quietly in the corner, invited by the agents to provide a statement if needed. I didn't need to say a word, though. The room was already turning against her. Margaret, one of Karen's oldest allies, folded her arms. Karen, if this really is federal, the HOA could be liable for allowing you to act on its behalf. That hit like a thunderclap. The color drained from Karen's face. No, this was me acting independently. Then you abused your position, Margaret shot back. Either way, you've compromised us. The tension grew thicker by the second. People who had once cowered under Karen's constant barrage of violation notices were suddenly emboldened. One after another, they brought up her past behavior. Her threats over mailbox paint, her fines for unapproved wreaths, her shouting matches about lawn chairs visible from the street. This isn't about the dish anymore, Greg said finally. It's about whether you're fit to lead this board. Karen's eyes flicked desperately around the room, searching for support. She found none. When she finally stormed out, the board didn't chase her. They simply sat there, silent for a moment, then someone whispered, "We should vote." I left before they made their decision. The writing was on the wall, and Karen knew it. That evening, as the sun set, Karen cornered me on my porch. She was shaking now, her bravado cracked all the way through. "You don't understand what this will do to me," she said, her voice a mix of fury and desperation. "My reputation, my standing, gone. I've worked too hard to let some stupid dish ruin everything." I kept my tone calm, almost gentle. "Karen, it's not the dish. It's the hammer in your hand, the cameras on the pole, and the agents who know exactly what you did." She gripped the railings so hard her knuckles went white. "I'll fight this. I'll bury you in legal fees. I cut her off. "You'll do nothing but wait for the fallout. And the longer you pretend you can control this, the harder it's going to hit." For once, she had no comeback. She turned, stormed off, and slammed her door. And as I sat back in my chair, I realized something. Karen wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting gravity, trying to claw her way back up while the entire neighborhood, and now the federal government, pulled her down. The real entertainment hadn't even started yet. Would you like me to continue Chapter 3 fully expanded to the 1,200-word version, with all the dialogue, HOA politics, and Karen's unraveling detailed out step by step? By the next morning, Karen's downfall had taken on the quality of a neighborhood soap opera. People lingered on sidewalks with travel mugs of coffee, whispering updates like traders on the stock exchange. The word was out. The HOA board had voted Karen out as president in an emergency session. She hadn't even been there to defend herself. When she stormed out of the meeting the day before, she left her chair empty, and they didn't waste the chance. Her seat was gone, her power dissolved in a unanimous vote. I knew because Greg, the quiet landscaping guy who rarely raised his voice above a mumble, came to my porch to tell me himself. His eyes gleamed with a kind of relief I hadn't seen before. "She's out," he said, almost breathless. "Do you know how long we've been waiting for this? 23 years. She's had her claws in this community since before my kids were born. And now, poof, gone." He snapped his fingers for effect. I leaned back in my chair, playing the long game as always. "Careful," I said. "Karen doesn't accept gone. She accepts revenge." And I was right. Not 3 hours later, I caught her outside with a clipboard, stalking the neighborhood like a hawk circling prey. She stopped at door after door, scribbling notes, whispering to anyone willing to listen. She was trying to rebuild her power block, like some general retreating to rally troops after losing the capital. But the mood had shifted. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her now nodded politely, shut their doors, and went back to their coffee. The spell was broken. Still, Karen wasn't the type to quit. She needed control like oxygen, and without the HOA, she was gasping. Around lunchtime, I got another restricted call. Same clipped voice on the other end. "Mr. Hale, replacement equipment will arrive within 72 hours. We'll also be sending a federal investigator to take your statement. Be advised, the civilian involved is now under preliminary review for criminal charges. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The edges of this story were already sharp enough. That evening, as the sun bled orange over the rooftops, Karen made her boldest move yet. She parked herself on my lawn. Not the sidewalk, not her driveway, my lawn. Clipboard in hand, voice booming, she called out to neighbors strolling by. "This man is lying to you," she shouted. "He's exaggerating to make me look bad. That was never government property. It was a personal toy, and he's been playing all of you." I stepped outside, calm as ever, and leaned on the porch rail. "Karen, do you really want to test me on this? Because I can hit play on the footage anytime you like. The agents already have copies, but I'd be happy to project it on the garage for the neighbors. Big screen, popcorn, the works." A ripple of laughter spread across the sidewalk crowd. Karen flushed scarlet. "You think this is funny?" she screeched. "This is slander. You're destroying my life with your lies." "Correction," I said evenly. "You're destroying your life with your hammer. I'm just the guy with the cameras." That set her off. She lunged toward the porch, waving her clipboard like it was a sword. For the first time, I saw the raw panic under all that bluster. This wasn't about the dish anymore. It was about her entire identity collapsing. Before she could take another step, the tall agent's black SUV rolled into view again. Karen froze, clipboard still raised. The vehicle stopped, doors opened, and the same two men stepped out, their expressions carved from stone. "Ma'am," the taller one said, voice calm but firm, "we need you to step aside." Karen sputtered, "On what grounds? You have no right to harass me in my own neighborhood." The shorter one held up a printed form. "You are hereby issued a federal notice of investigation. Until further notice, you are not to interfere with or approach this property." Karen blinked, her fury tripping over shock. "You can't just ban me from my own neighborhood." "This is not a neighborhood issue," the tall one replied. "This is a matter of federal infrastructure. Continued interference may result in immediate arrest." Silence fell over the street. Neighbors who had been hiding behind blinds now stood openly in their driveways, phones raised, recording every second. Karen, once the terror of this cul-de-sac, was now the evening's entertainment. Her voice cracked. "You people don't understand. I was protecting the community. This man is manipulating all of you. He's not who you think he is." I raised my coffee mug in a mock toast. "Cheers, Karen." The agents didn't laugh. But the crowd did. A low ripple of chuckles rolled through the street, the kind of sound that cuts deeper than outright mockery because it tells you you've lost the audience. Karen dropped the clipboard. Her hands shook. She turned and ran. Not a dramatic stomp, not her usual storm off, but an actual run, like a fox finally realizing the hounds weren't afraid anymore. The agents approached me then. "We'll be back tomorrow," the tall one said. "Prepare your full statement." "Of course," I said. As they left, I looked around at the neighbors, still gathered like an impromptu jury. 4 years they'd tolerated Karen's petty tyranny. Now they were watching her fall apart, and not one person moved to help her. That night, my phone buzzed with texts from people I barely knew on the street. Messages like, "About time she got put in her place," or, "If you ever need witnesses, count me in." The tide had turned. But I knew Karen too well to think she'd accept defeat quietly. She wasn't the type to lick wounds in private. She was the type to claw her way back with everything she had left. And sure enough, just before midnight, I saw her silhouette outside, pacing with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried through the quiet, frantic, angry, desperate. Words like lawyer, retaliation, and ruined drifted on the night air. I sat in the dark on my porch, silent, watching. Because I understood one thing she didn't: the more she thrashed, the deeper she sank. Karen thought this was still a neighborhood squabble. But she was wrong. This wasn't a battle of lawn chairs and mailbox paint anymore. This was federal, recorded, and irreversible. And as I sipped my coffee, I knew the real storm, the one Karen couldn't stop, was still on its way. Do you want me to push Chapter 4 to the full 1,200 words version, layering in the late-night confrontation with her lawyer, the neighbors turning her rants viral on social media, and the agents tightening the leash, or keep the pace brisk like this? Karen's unraveling reached its peak on the 5th day. By then, the neighborhood wasn't just whispering, it was buzzing like a hive that had been kicked. Every doorstep conversation, every morning jog, every evening dog walk revolved around the same subject: Karen. People who had once feared her notices tucked under their doormats were now swapping stories, laughing about her tantrums, and re-watching the videos that neighbors had started uploading online. Clips of her hammering the dish had gone viral locally. One of them, captioned HOA Karen vs. Federal Dish, had already racked up thousands of views in the county Facebook group. I didn't post the footage. I didn't need to. The neighborhood had become my army without me lifting a finger. Someone even made a meme with her holding the hammer like Thor, except the caption read, "Entitlement, assemble." That morning, I was told to expect the federal investigator. He wasn't like the 2 agents I'd already met. This man carried an aura of finality. He wore a gray suit, moved with sharp precision, and wasted no words. "Mr. Hale," he said as we shook hands. "Let's go through your statement." We sat at my kitchen table. I gave him the footage, the timeline, and the string of HOA letters Karen had left in my mailbox. I laid it all out, step by step, without embellishment. He didn't ask for theatrics. He wanted facts, and I had them all neatly packaged. When we finished, he gave a small nod. "This is sufficient. She'll face charges. The extent depends on whether the U.S. attorney wants to make an example of her." I raised an eyebrow. "And what are the odds of that?" He gave a ghost of a smile. "High. Very high." Before I could reply, a commotion erupted outside. Voices raised and shrill. Karen was on my lawn again, but this time she wasn't alone. A man in a cheap suit trailed behind her, briefcase in hand. Her lawyer. The investigator stood, calm as a statue. "Shall we?" We stepped outside to the scene, Karen pointing at me like I was the villain in her twisted stage play. "There he is," she barked. "That's the man defaming me, harassing me, and trying to destroy my reputation. I demand he cease and desist immediately." Her lawyer, sweating under the noon sun, cleared his throat. "My client requests that you stop slandering her in public forums. We are prepared to pursue legal action if necessary." The investigator's badge flashed like a blade. "Sir, I suggest you put that briefcase down and reconsider. Your client is under federal investigation for destruction of government property. Any lawsuit will be dismissed the moment it's filed." The lawyer blinked, color draining from his face. Karen whipped around, furious. "What are you doing? You're supposed to defend me. Don't just stand there." But the lawyer was already backing away, muttering something about federal jurisdiction and conflict of interest. He abandoned her mid-rant, retreating down the sidewalk without a backward glance. Karen's scream could have shattered glass. "Coward! Useless coward!" The investigator remained composed. "Ma'am, you've been advised multiple times to stay off this property. Continued violation will result in immediate arrest." For a moment, Karen stood there, trembling, fists clenched at her sides. Her entire empire of control, built on fines, threats, and intimidation, had crumbled, and all that was left was raw, desperate rage. "You'll regret this," she spat, her voice cracking. "All of you. This neighborhood will regret betraying me." Neighbors had gathered again, lining the sidewalks like spectators at a parade. But instead of fear, their faces showed relief. Some even smiled. A few clapped quietly. Karen saw them and broke. She let out a strangled sound, turned on her heel, and fled to her house. The door slammed hard enough to rattle windows. The investigator exhaled. "She'll be charged within the week. Destruction of government property, interference with emergency communications, and potentially obstruction, depending on how she behaves from here. Behaves? I asked, a touch of sarcasm. Not her strong suit. He gave me a look that suggested he'd already seen worse. Then he left, and the neighborhood settled into an odd quiet. But the quiet didn't last. That evening, my phone buzzed with yet another restricted call. "Mr. Hale," the clipped voice said, "the replacement receiver is operational. You are back online." I stepped outside, looking at the new dish gleaming on its mount. Sleek, reinforced, untouchable. It almost looked like a trophy. Across the street, Karen's blinds twitched. She was still watching. She would always be watching. But she no longer had power. Not over me, not over the board, not over anyone. Later that night, neighbors gathered in my driveway with folding chairs and coolers. Someone set up a projector against my garage. And yes, we played the footage. In 4K. Multiple angles. The hammer swing, the shatter, the smug declaration of "You're welcome." The moment she realized she was in over her head. The arrival of the agents. The clipboard rant. Every second replayed for the people she'd tormented for decades. The laughter rolled through the cul-de-sac like thunder. It wasn't cruel. It was cathartic. I sat back in my chair, sipping a beer someone had handed me, watching the neighborhood come alive not in fear, but in freedom. For the first time in years, Karen wasn't the center of authority here. She was the punchline. And that was the ultimate revenge. Not the agents, not the charges, not even the viral videos. It was watching an entire community finally breathe without her shadow pressing down on them. Karen's hammer had destroyed more than a dish that day. It had destroyed her reign. And all I had to do was sit back, stay calm, and let gravity do the work. The long game always wins.